Thanks so much for joining us today. Donald Trump wrote a book once. You might have heard of it. It's called The Art of the Deal. In that book, in his words, the book is supposed to teach the art of negotiation. It's supposed to talk about the power of leverage and the importance of always walking away with something in your favor. Now, the book was really instrumental in showing us the man Donald Trump is, this businessman, and cemented his image as one, someone who makes deals, a negotiator. And in his book, if you flip through the pages, you're going to find things explaining like the power of leverage, fighting back, delivering the goods. There's even a section where you might, if you look in the book, you're going to find something about thinking big. All of these are really good aspects of the art of deal making. And it's something Donald Trump allegedly specialized in before coming into politics. But you know what you're not going to find in The Art of the Deal? You're not going to find a chapter called Surrender to Your Enemies. You're not going to find a section called Abandoning Your Allies. You're not going to find a single page explaining how to give away everything for free and call it a victory. You're not going to find any of that. Yet that's exactly what is playing out right now, and that is exactly what Donald Trump is doing in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. In his so-called negotiations with Russia, he is giving away our leverage. He is not fighting back, but rather rolling over. And instead of walking away with something of favor, he's instead abdicated everything in the negotiation to Vladimir Putin and let him decide what's going on and let him run the show. This is not really in The Art of the Deal. So I think after Donald Trump's done being president, he should release a volume 2 of The Art of the Deal and talk about these new aspects of the art of negotiating. But if Trump were actually following the advice of his book, he'd probably demand concessions from Russia. He'd make sure Ukraine got a fair deal. And he would ensure that our European allies weren't left out in the dust, left out in the cold, without any idea about what's going on. Yet that's exactly what is going on right now. The opposite of all of that. He's not at all following his own teachings. Because what we're seeing right now in this whole Russia-Ukraine stuff right now, it's not the art of the deal. It's the art of no deal. I mean, look, we can talk about some of what's going on. President Trump has engaged in direct talks with Russia about the future of Ukraine, about the future of this whole conflict with Ukraine. But you know who's not at the table? Ukraine. They have not invited Ukraine to talk about the future of Ukraine when it comes to Russia. Absolutely, it's not even a joke. It's not like an SNL skit. Like, it is literally the fact that they have decided that they are just not going to involve Ukraine in these discussions about its own future. And instead, Donald Trump has been corresponding with and talking with Vladimir Putin. Now, there was a report that was going around, like people were actually, when they thought about it and they explored it a little more, we actually don't know if Donald Trump has talked to Putin. He wouldn't tell us if he talked to Putin, when he talked to Putin, how much he talked to Putin, or why he was talking to Putin. But what we do know is they finally did start talking when Donald Trump finally publicly started admitting that he was talking to Vladimir Putin. We got these developments that there were going to be peace negotiations in the Russia-Ukraine war, something Donald Trump notably promised in his first 24 hours as president on the campaign trail. He didn't do that. And obviously, President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine has rightfully so been concerned about this whole thing because his entire country has been left out of the process of deciding its own future. And he's decided that he's not going to abide by any decisions that don't involve Ukraine at the negotiating table. I mean, that's fair. It's fair. It's fair that he's saying that. But it's not just, if we're looking at this not from a solely Ukrainian perspective, let's look at this from a historical perspective. I think the precedent that we're setting now by making decisions for a different country without letting that country actually have even a say in the decisions that are being made, it sets a precedent. It sets a precedent that maybe we shouldn't be following because, you know, history has always worked when we decided not to include countries in their decisions. But setting aside the fact that Ukraine isn't even involved in the negotiations for its own future, let's talk about some of the stuff that Trump and his team have been talking about with Russia. So if we were to put a general summary of what you can expect of like what is being discussed, President Trump has signaled in pretty much all sense that Ukraine would not be joining NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organizations. I've talked about it extensively on the show, but it's basically our European partnership to combat Russian influence, like the organization that's literally designed to block off Russia, to say back off. Ukraine is not going to join it. And you know what? I understand why there are some people that don't want Ukraine to join. But when you look at the reasoning of it, there's different reasonings that you might want to look at. So the reason I might see that Ukraine might not want to join NATO, and this is generally what most experts will acknowledge, is that Russia is still going to harass Ukraine. They're still going to bully Ukraine. And so in NATO, we have this thing called Article 5, which basically means an attack on one is an attack on all members. And so all members are going to respond to an attack on a country. And so I would think the reason that Russia doesn't want Ukraine in NATO is because they don't want to go to war with all countries in NATO, because they still want to attack and harass Ukraine. But the reason that Donald Trump doesn't want Ukraine to be in NATO is not because he believes that, but it's because really that's what Vladimir Putin is saying. That's what Vladimir Putin feels so threatened by the idea of Ukraine and NATO. And of course, Donald Trump and his team want to call Russia the victims in this whole invasion. And that's why, and they're the victims because they were so nervous that Ukraine would join NATO. But the other thing that we could plausibly expect is at the very least, when it comes to territorial stuff, we can expect that Donald Trump is not going to support restoring Ukraine to its 2014 borders. We're all very well aware of the Russian invasion that started in 2022. But 8 years before that, in 2014, Russia actually invaded a part of Ukraine called Crimea. Again, still Russia entering an independent country, showing its tendency to want to invade free and sovereign countries. But whatever, they got forcibly taken away. And so now it seems like Trump is not very interested in giving Crimea back to Ukraine. And Russia's pretty happy about that, I'm sure. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who was once seen as a pragmatic foreign policy thinker, is now holding meetings with a Russian delegation in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, including with Russia's foreign minister. And they are now formulating a negotiation on what the policy framework is going to look like. And once again, I should point out, has conspicuously left out Ukraine and has left out our European allies. Donald Trump has had this whole problem with our European allies, somehow, for whatever reason, thinking that they're not pulling their weight. If we look at aid going to Ukraine, it's pretty split about coming from us and from the EU. But it's still, Donald Trump still thinks that the European Union is the enemy, not Russia, not the country that is invading a free and sovereign country. Then, of course, totally merit-based hire, former Fox News Weekend host Pete Hegseth, now our Secretary of Defense, was at the Munich Security Conference where he made headlines for declaring that Ukraine's pre-2014 borders were, quote, unrealistic, and suggesting that everything is on the table, inadvertently revealing the administration's stance on this whole matter. Here's a clip of that. Take a look.
But we must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective. Chasing this illusionary goal will only prolong the war and cause more suffering. The United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement.
Of course, after seeing the huge blunder and public outcry that came as a result of Pete Hegseth a member of this master negotiators team, mind you, revealing his cards, he felt the need to correct himself and to walk back some of the statements. So here's him cleaning up what he said.
Forces that could potentially be deployed. Like, how does that deter President Putin?
Well, I would say, I want to be clear about something as it pertains to NATO membership not being realistic outcome for negotiations. That's something that was stated as part of my remarks here, as part of a coordination with how we're executing these ongoing negotiations, which are led by President Trump. All of that said, these negotiations are led by President Trump. Everything is on the table in his conversations with Vladimir Putin and Zelensky.
The way he like plucked at every single word he could think of to somehow he plucked at all the words, whatever word he could think of. The public remark, the executive. But you know what? It's not just, people on the other side that are upset with him. There are people in Hegseth's own party who have been dissatisfied by the Secretary of Defense's comments. In fact, the Republican chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Senator Roger Wicker, called it, quote, a rookie mistake. And about Hegseth's comments suggesting that Ukraine's pre-2014 borders were unrealistic and that everything was on the table, Senator Wicker said, quote, I don't know who wrote the speech. It is the kind of thing Tucker Carlson could have written. And Carlson is a fool. Well, at least Senator Wicker, I mean, he still voted for him, but whatever. Tucker Carlson's a fool. And Pete Hegseth seems to be saying a lot of things that Tucker Carlson is saying, but it's fine. It's just a rookie mistake. Maybe we should take a page out of Mike Pence's words, of all people, who said that maybe we should have someone with experience in the roles of leadership rather than someone who needs to get on the job training. I'm sure I can put, here's a clip of that.
Now is not the time for on-the-job training. We don't need to bring in a rookie. We don't need to bring in people without experience. We need to bring...
And then, of course, as a cherry on top of this whole weird cake of foreign policy and geopolitics, instead of figuring out ways that our ally Ukraine should somehow leave this negotiation, at least with a little bit of their national sovereignty, no, instead of that, Donald Trump has decided to just attack their president. In a press conference today, because this is still a developing story, so this is the most up-to-date information that I have as of the recording of this, President Trump escalated tensions by labeling President Zelensky of Ukraine as a dictator. He called the president of Ukraine a dictator, a democracy, a dictator. And then he warned that if Zelensky did not move fast, that he risks losing his country. So what we're seeing right now is Donald Trump attacking our ally that has been maybe not our ally on paper, but our close partner, our friend in this conflict, Ukraine. He is attacking their president, calling him a dictator, saying that they don't have democracy. You know what that sounds a lot like? Kremlin talking points. And that's because it is. These things that Donald Trump is saying are literally Kremlin talking points that we are starting to get. We are starting, he's literally saying things, and Trump's like, it's not just me. It's not what we, it's actually the case. That is literally what they are saying. Take a look at some of the stuff that Donald Trump said. Here's some clips of that.
Yeah, I would say that, when they want a seat at the table, you could say the people have to, wouldn't the people of Ukraine have to say, it's been a long time since we've had an election. That's not a Russia thing. That's something coming from me and coming from many other countries also. I think I have the power to end this war, and I think it's going very well. But today I heard, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land Everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down. But they chose not to do it that way. And President Biden, in all fairness, he doesn't have a clue. What he was so bad for this. He was so bad, so pathetic. It's so sad.
He calls the president of Ukraine a dictator because they haven't had elections, because they're, I don't know, getting invaded by Russia. Meanwhile, I should point out that the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, has been president of that country for longer than my entire lifetime, plus more. So, you know, let's set the record straight. But we shouldn't just pretend that, you know, it's all about how Donald Trump feels and thinks. Like, there is a Vladimir Putin angle to this whole dynamic and to this whole negotiation. And if Donald Trump says that Putin wants peace, don't believe that, because Putin is not, that's not how he operates. That is not Vladimir Putin. There are credible intelligence reports that Vladimir Putin is still set and committed to reclaiming all of Ukraine. It's a part of his personal agenda. He wants Ukraine. And so even if after this deal, they somehow walk away with like a portion of Ukraine, that's not good enough for Vladimir Putin. He wants more. He wants it all. And so this purported interest in peace, it's not Vladimir Putin. He wants, it's very clear he wants more. Analysts, including retired U.S. Army General Jack Keane, say that Putin might actually be trying to buy time. Like, rather than having to deal with Donald Trump, who sometimes politically is a little unpredictable, you never know when he decides to just turn around, instead of like relying on that, Putin might be making a strategic decision to just wait out the current administration, let them leave in 4 years, and then try to make a more aggressive move. He's probably banking on this idea that there's going to be a shift in U.S. foreign policy when someone comes into the White House in a few years who actually once again believes in America's long-standing ideals of defending democracy. I don't know, Vladimir Putin might change his mind and then once again say, maybe I want to go back into Ukraine. Of course, Vladdy was the same fella who'd been interfering in our own elections and had this strong preference for Donald Trump. Like, that is kind of what people were saying. I don't know. But you don't have to go with that whole thing. You could just go with this fact. Joe Biden was a stickler about maintaining American strength. He was such a stickler about maintaining American strength and combating Russian influence. Oh, poor Vlad. He was the victim in all of this. So he had to invade Ukraine, is what they're saying. He had to invade Ukraine. Oh, poor guy. But that was then. Now Donald Trump, he's basically taken care of all of it for him. He's telling Europe to shut up. He's telling Ukraine's president that he's a dictator. All the while, Russia is just, you know, sitting back and relaxing. And then, of course, in this final thing of all of this is Europe. Our allies. Our allies who have been completely and utterly surprised by everything that's going on. Just a few days ago, Vice President Vance, who was at the same Munich security conference where Secretary Hegseth was, he, in his proverbial Disney villain demeanor, decided to attack our European allies and somehow say that they are the problem in all of this. They have so many problems that they need to deal with, like basically attacking our European allies, which left many of our European allies, quite frankly, just shocked with what American foreign policy was now doing. And again, I should point out, and I keep pointing it out, that in addition to Ukraine, our European allies who have been equally involved in all of this, literally on the same continent, like living in constant fear of what's going to happen, they've been left out of the Riyadh talks. Like, they are not in Saudi Arabia right now talking with the Russian delegation or with the American delegation for that matter. And that should be something that concerns us all, because like I said, Vladimir Putin, he looks at Ukraine, he gets a portion, a smidgen of it. That's not good enough for him. He wants more. He wants all of Ukraine. But it's not just Ukraine. There is credible evidence that Vladimir Putin wants beyond Ukraine. In the words of former UN ambassador and former Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley, it's not going to be Ukraine. Poland and the Baltics are next. Take a look.
We better believe them. Russia said Poland and the Baltics are next. If that happens, we're looking at a world war. This is about preventing war. And so the way you prevent war is not that we give cash to Ukraine, not that we put troops on the ground, but that we get with our allies and we make sure that we give them the equipment and the ammunition to win. Because when Ukraine wins, that sends a message to China with Taiwan. It sends a message to Iran that wants to build a bomb. It sends a message to North Korea testing ballistic missiles. And it sends a message to Russia that it's over. That's what we have to do. And keep in mind, everybody wants to know, well, how does this war end? It would end in a day if Russia would pull out. If Ukraine pulls out, then we're all looking at a world war.
I don't know what Ambassador Haley believes now, because she does love to flip-flop a lot. And like, she endorsed Donald Trump, so I don't know if this is the part of it that she's endorsing. But whatever she said at the time when she was a presidential candidate, that was very accurate. Poland and the Baltics are also in Putin's eye line. He sees them. And this whole NATO being a strong, united force against Russia thing is throwing a wrench in those plans. And so Putin really would love to see a weakened NATO in order to go jump in and maybe, I don't know, harass, bully our other allies, our other European partners. And something tells me that this abdication from NATO and from our European allies and this preference to go with Vladimir Putin is kind of boding into that agenda of Putin's. But in addition to Russia and Europe and Ukraine, we should also be thinking about another element of this whole pie, and that's China. You might be thinking, like, what's China? Why does China matter? Well, just like Russia loves to go after Ukraine, and Ukraine has been their personal pet project, Taiwan and the Indo-Pacific has been a personal pet project of China, and particularly their leader, Xi Jinping, who would really love a taste of Taiwan. And they're watching how we act in Ukraine, how we respond, how we unite, how we fight the Russian aggression and the attempted invasion of Ukraine. And right now, China's looking at what we're doing in Ukraine, and they're thinking we're probably going to act the same in Taiwan. What does that mean for potentially their next move? I don't know. But it should be something that our foreign policy thinkers are thinking about, and I know they are. But that is what is going on in Ukraine. And I know that this is a fast developing issue. This might even be our topic for Saturday's episode. I don't know. But it's still something that we all should be thinking about and that we should all be paying attention to, because what happens, this White House's style of decision making is completely unorthodox. And they are not at all in line with what traditional American foreign policy is, which is to fight for the democracy of nations, to stand with our allies, to go against Russian aggression, to stand up to dictators. That playbook is not the playbook of this administration, at least. And so we don't really know what to expect. So we'll be keeping an eye on what's going on in Ukraine. I've been covering this for 3 years, so I have been keeping an eye on it and paying attention to what's going on. I encourage you to do the same as well. And we'll see where this goes. But if you liked my commentary, then go ahead and subscribe. Follow us on Spotify. Follow us on social media. Check out the SeanSShow.com. And you know, if you liked, I think on the side over there, there's probably stuff about Meet the Trump Administration, my mini-series talking about people like Pete Hegseth, as well as a video that maybe you might want to watch. I don't know. But that does it for us here today. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you in the next one.